The top player in the class who got the biggest bonus is a infielder named Elian Pena, who got $5 million signing bonus from the New York Mets. That's like pretty consensus top name, right?
Yeah, I think Josuar Gonzalez, we'll talk about him in a second, the shortstop with the Giants, has a case, but I mean, the money speaks for itself to some degree, right? I mean, him getting $5 million and no one else really got more than $4 is pretty substantial. I mean, this is a bat that the Mets are really buying here. But of course, remember, this is not an example of Steve Cohen's deep pockets. This is a decision by the Mets to devote nearly 80% of their bonus pool to one player, which we've seen teams do in the past, but it says that's a reflection of their enthusiasm for a player that they've clearly been very into for a long time. This is someone who was catching the attention of scouts when he was 12. And yes, there are problems with that, but the way that usually happens is that these players are training at these academies at that young of an age, and teams go and evaluate players for, the 2021 class, and then there are just other players playing, and they're like, who's that kid? And they're like, oh yeah, he's 12. He can't sign for another few seasons. Listen, again, this is a very uncomfortable topic, but it's also the reality of how this market works. And there could be a time when that is no longer the case, where deals are being made at that time. And that's an international draft discussion that we're not going to have on this episode of Baseball Barbacast, but it speaks to Pena's talent that has been really on display for multiple years, and clearly someone that they believe in. Is a shortstop, we'll see. But offensively, this is about as advanced of a hitter we've seen kind of come out of this market in a really long time.
What are the other top names to know from Latin America?
So Josuar Gonzalez, switch hitting shortstop that the Giants signed for $3 million. Again, more of the well-rounded type. I think that's the other interesting thing about Pena is it's really just bat focused. So many of the top players that we see get the most money are the athletes, right? The switch hitters, the shortstops, the center fielders, the plus runners. Whereas Pena has kind of rounded his game out, but it's really more about him as a hitter. Whereas Gonzalez, it's classic, right? Switch hitting shortstops. That's kind of where you start the starter kit for the top prospects. The cool thing about his signing is that Willy Adames was actually there for the Giants signing, as well as Gerard Encarnacion and Camilo Doval, two other Dominicans in the Giants organization. But Willy Adames, right, hasn't even played a game yet with the Giants, and he's down there celebrating that day for them. So that was certainly very cool to see that. We got an email from Luke mentioning that, so thanks for the shout out there. Andrew Salas, that's a name that some people probably recognize. This is the brother of Ethan Salas, who got the largest bonus in the international class a couple years ago from the Padres. The Salas family is interesting because they've grown up in Miami, but have Venezuelan heritage. And so they've gone back down to Venezuela and signed as amateurs. This is something we've seen a few players do over the last decade or so, but the Salas family in particular, garnering these kind of bonuses, it speaks to the talent level there. This is also a switch hitting shortstop, $3.7 million, which I believe is the second largest bonus of anyone going to the Miami Marlins.
And then kind of a trailblazing character to talk about briefly is Japanese player named Shotaro Morii, who got $1.5 million to sign with the A's out of a high school in Japan. And the reason that this is significant is because it is a new pathway into stateside baseball for a Japanese player. Most Japanese players enter MLB in one of two ways. Either their contract with an NPB team in Japan reaches its end. They then are a free agent and are allowed to sign a deal with a team over here in MLB, or like Roki Sasaki, they are posted by their NPB team, and the team over in Japan gets a fee from the MLB team. Okay, those are really the two ways. There are only 3 players ever in the history of Japanese baseball who appeared in an MLB game without having first appeared in an NPB game. Those are all very bizarre circumstances that people can do research on their own.
You can read about it. Maybe you wrote about it, right? You can go read Jake's story on it at Yahoo.
Shotaro Morii is the first elite high school prospect in Japan to sign directly with an MLB team. There is a player named Rintaro Sasaki, who was projected to be the top prospect in Japan last year, who bypassed the Japanese system to be a freshman at Stanford, where he will be playing this upcoming season. That was a big deal. But what Morii is doing is kind of taking that one step further by going directly to an MLB club. How good is he? Like Josuar Gonzalez, he's a athletic, broad-shouldered shortstop who, now granted, he's a couple years older and throws 95 off the mound, so there's a nice little fallback plan there. But it's like, who knows? Right? Like, we're not sure.
and that's the fun part about this day, and also just the context that you constantly have to remind yourself of is the variance is so. I mean, part of this is because a lot of these deals are agreed to again, like long before this day this week, and so the amount that these players change from the time these deals are upon, not to mention the amount they'll change from now when they're 16 to when they're 18 to when they're 20, et cetera, so and so and so. It's amazing. I mean, you go back a year and you see a player, you look at the top of last year's class and you're like, who are these guys? These guys aren't very good. But you have a Leo DeVries with the Padres, and you have Jesus Mate with the Brewers, who got $900,000. He was ranked like 35th or whatever. And he was just like one of the guys who was like, oh yeah, he's like, he's pretty good. And then like a year later, he's one of the best prospects in baseball. Right. And then but even more historically, Juan Soto was like the 10th best player in his class. Julio Rodriguez, same thing, right? Like they were known, they got over $1 million, but it wasn't like this guy will change your franchise. That is not what we were saying about those players. And one of those players might have just signed this week, and we don't know it yet. And some of them will end up very disappointing, like very quickly.
Yeah.
And some of them will be awesome. And that's all part of the fun. And as long as you can kind of hold all those things in your head at the same time, I think you could recognize the importance of this day.
But you got to play the game. Very quickly, just to make everyone feel old before we take a break.
Yes.
The sons of Pedro Strop, Hanley Ramirez, and Francisco Cordero all signed yesterday. The one for me that really hurt my head was Pedro Strop's son, Rael Strop, who signed with the Cardinals for $1.4 million. Pedro Strop still feels like a 27-year-old.
Pedro Strop's 39.
Yeah.
Pedro Strop pitched in 2021. So, but here's my problem with like that we're old. It's like, I just watched LeBron play with Bronny. So he kind of broke like any sort of conversation about this. Yeah. Like it's kind of, I can't really say anything else about that. But anyway, those are our bigger picture. I wrote a little bit about some of these players. And then there's one more we're going to get to for Good, the Bad, the Ugly. But that's our general January 15th takeaways.